The clock on the wall read exactly 10:20 in the morning when the final decision was delivered. I remember that precise minute because the autumn sun was hitting the glass partition of the conference room at a sharp, cold angle, reflecting off the polished walnut table. Brenda Vance, the director of human resources, sat across from me with her hands neatly folded over a blue folder. She had a pleasant, completely empty smile that she probably practiced in front of a mirror. To her right sat Donald Finch, my direct manager. He was in his early 30s, wore a tailored gray suit, and spent more time adjusting his cuffs than looking at me. "Brian, your position is stable, and your compensation reflects that," Brenda said, her voice dropping into that professional, rehearsed register, stable. That was the word of the day. It was the same word they had used the year before, and the year before that, and the year before that. For 4 consecutive years, I had walked into this glass room with a list of achievements, system optimizations, and client praise, only to be handed the same word, stable. Like the integrations holding our logistics database together did not require constant vigilance. Like the midnight alerts I resolved in my pajamas were just part of the background hum of the building. "We reviewed the latest market data for senior operations managers," Brenda continued, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. I did not need to look at it. The number printed there in clean black ink was the exact same salary I had been earning since I turned 50. I was 54 now. In those 4 years, inflation had climbed, the cost of living in our city had soared, and the scope of my responsibilities had expanded to cover 3 entire subdepartments. Yet my value on their paper remained frozen in time. "I understand the market data, Brenda," I said, keeping my voice even, flat, and devoid of any irritation. "But over the last 12 months, I have migrated our legacy middleware to the new system, reduced transaction errors by 30%, and personally handled all high-priority escalations for our top accounts. That is not just maintenance, that is growth." Donald finally looked up, offering a quick, placating nod. "And we really appreciate that effort, Brian. Truly, you are the backbone of the operations floor. But compensation is tied to our departmental structure. We have to keep things aligned across the entire organization." Structure, alignment, consistency. They had an entire dictionary of words designed to say no without actually using the word. I sat there and let the silence stretch between us. When you are younger, you feel the urge to argue. You want to present more data, raise your voice, or show frustration. But at 54, after spending 16 years inside this company, you realize that arguing is a waste of breath. The decision had been made weeks ago in some closed budget meeting that I had never attended. They had already decided what I was worth to them, and it was my job to accept it. "I see," I said, slowly closing my notepad. I did not sign the acknowledgement paper. I did not make a scene. I simply stood up, adjusted my jacket, and thanked them for their time. "We can certainly revisit this next year, Brian," Brenda added, her smile returning as if she had successfully navigated a difficult landing. "Next year," I repeated, giving a small, polite nod. As I walked out of the glass conference room, I caught my reflection in the transparent wall. My hair was graying at the temples, my shoulders were broad, and my face showed the quiet weariness of a man who had spent too many nights watching green lights flicker on computer monitors. I did not look angry. I looked professional, exactly as they expected me to behave. But inside, a switch had flipped. It was not a sudden burst of rage. It was a cold, clear realization. The company did not value the stability I created. They simply took it for granted. They treated stability as a natural state of being, rather than a fragile construct held together by 16 years of my personal dedication, late-night hotfixes, and proprietary scripts. I walked back down the long corridor toward my desk on the main operations floor. The room was filled with the low, constant hum of servers and the quiet clicking of keyboards. My desk was positioned in the corner, surrounded by 3 large monitors displaying real-time data feeds. To anyone else, it looked like a simple job, a series of dashboards, a few automated triggers, and occasional maintenance. But the truth was far more complex. The company's entire transaction network was a patchwork of legacy databases and modern APIs, held together by custom middleware scripts I had written myself over the decade. I sat down and pulled up the main system status. Everything was green. The throughput was steady. But I knew that beneath that green surface lay 100 potential failure points. Every hour, thousands of logistics records flowed through our pipelines. If a database sync delayed by even a few seconds, the entire queue would back up, delaying shipments and costing clients thousands of dollars. My phone buzzed. It was 11:45 in the morning, an escalation call from one of our major clients, Apex Logistics. Their system was experiencing a data mismatch in their morning batch. "Brian, thank goodness you answered," the client representative said, his voice tense. "We are seeing mismatched order numbers on our end. If this is not resolved, we will have to halt shipments." "I am on it," I said. I did not open a ticket, I did not schedule a meeting, I simply opened a terminal, ran a custom diagnostic script I had built on my home computer years ago, and identified a timing offset in the middleware. I corrected the script, ran the sync, and watched the numbers align. "You are all set," I told the representative. "You are a lifesaver, Brian." "Thanks," he said, hanging up. The entire fix took 8 minutes. No one else in the company knew it had happened. Donald Finch was likely still in his office, reviewing slides for his next presentation. To the executives, the system had remained stable all morning. They would never know that without those 8 minutes of quiet intervention, a major account would have halted operations. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the glowing monitors. For 16 years, I had taken pride in being the invisible safety net. But as I watched the green dashboard, I realized that by hiding the friction, I had made myself invisible. I had protected them from the consequences of their own neglect. And today, they had told me that my invisibility was worth exactly what they were currently paying. No more. I decided, right then, that I was done being their ghost. The next few days on the operations floor went on as usual, but my focus had shifted. I was no longer looking at my work as a career. I was looking at it as an arrangement. I began to observe the dynamics of our department with the detached curiosity of an outsider. My manager, Donald Finch, had recently hired a young assistant named Owen Gallagher. Owen was fresh out of business school, possessed a glossy Master of Business Administration degree, and had an abundance of confidence that far exceeded his technical competence. Donald took an immediate liking to him. They spoke the same language of synergy, deliverables, and high-level strategy. Donald quickly placed Owen in charge of presenting the weekly operation reports to the executive team. Since Owen did not actually know how the data was gathered, it fell on me to train him. I spent hours sitting with him at my desk, walking him through the database architecture, showing him how the data points connected, and teaching him how to interpret the dashboard logs. Owen was polite, took meticulous notes on his tablet, and asked the right questions to make himself sound smart. "So, if the dashboard shows yellow, I just need to flag it for you, right?" Owen had asked during one of our sessions, flashing a bright, eager smile. "If the dashboard shows yellow, the system is already failing, Owen," I had explained patiently. "You have to watch the query queue. If the queue latency climbs past 2 seconds, you need to manually rebalance the partition. Otherwise, the database locks up." He had nodded, scribbling down the word latency, but I could tell he did not grasp the weight of it. To him, the system was just a set of charts to be copied into a presentation, and it worked. The next week, Donald and Owen stood in front of the vice president, presenting a slide deck that showed a 5% efficiency increase. My custom scripts had generated that increase, and my silent maintenance had sustained it, but my name was nowhere on the slides. Owen was praised for his excellent analysis, and Donald was commended for his leadership. I sat in the back of the conference room during that presentation, watching the smiles and the nods. I did not feel bitter. Instead, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I remembered the review cycle from 8 months ago. At that time, I had sat with Donald in his office asking for a market adjustment. I had brought a detailed log of the overtime hours I had put in, the system migrations I had completed, and the training materials I had written. Donald had looked at my documentation, leaned back, and sighed. "Brian, you are doing incredible work. But right now, we are focusing our resources on expanding our technological pathways. We need to keep our operational costs consistent so we can invest in future projects. Let us look at this again in the next cycle. There could be leadership opportunities for you down the road." It was the same promise he had made 2 cycles before that. They kept dicing the carrot and hanging it just out of reach, expecting me to keep running on the treadmill. They wanted me to believe that if I just worked a little harder, stayed a little later, and solved a few more crises, they would finally see my worth. But sitting in that presentation room, watching Owen explain my monitoring layers as if they were simple cogs in a machine, I understood the game. I was not being overlooked because they did not know what I did. I was being kept where I was because I did it too well. If they promoted me or adjusted my salary, they would have to find someone else to hold the ceiling up. It was far cheaper to keep me in the corner, feed me empty promises of future opportunities, and let me manage the risk for free. I looked at Owen, who was smiling at a question from the vice president. He was the perfect corporate citizen. He could speak for 20 minutes without saying anything of substance. He was visible, clean, and replaceable. If Owen left tomorrow, Donald could hire another business graduate and the presentations would look exactly the same. But if I left, the system would lose its memory. It would lose the thousands of tiny, unwritten rules that kept the database from crashing under load. That afternoon, I returned to my corner desk. I opened the folder where I kept the source code for my custom monitoring scripts. These were not tools provided by the company. They were scripts I had written on my own personal laptop during my weekends and evenings over a period of 7 years. I had brought them to the office because I was tired of debugging system failures at 3 in the morning. They were my intellectual property, created outside my official duties as an operations analyst, and never formally transferred to the company. I looked at the code. It was clean, elegant, and highly specialized. It acted as a translator between the old database and the new integration portal, catching data mismatches and correcting them before they could trigger error logs. Without these scripts, the company's official dashboards were essentially blind. They would only show a failure after the database had already locked up and halted shipments. I closed the folder. For years, I had let the company use my tools for free because I wanted my job to be easier and because I naively believed it would be recognized as a contribution. But now I saw it differently. I was leasing them as high-end sports car, and they were paying me the price of a bicycle rental, all while telling me the car was stable and did not require maintenance. I decided it was time to end the lease. Over the next week, I began to change the timing of my work. I did not stop doing my job, but I stopped doing it early. One morning, a data mismatch occurred in the database replication queue. Normally, I would have detected the anomaly in the query queues and corrected it before it could impact the transaction logs. This time, I sat back and watched my dashboard. I let the queue fill. I watched the latency rise from 2 seconds to 5, then to 10. At 10 minutes past 11, the official company monitoring system finally triggered a yellow alert. A red alert followed 5 minutes later. Donald Finch came running out of his office, his face slightly flushed. "Brian, the main dashboard is red. What is going on?" "We are seeing a replication mismatch, Donald," I said, keeping my voice calm and professional. "Can you fix it?" he asked, looking over my shoulder at the screens. "I will look into it," I replied. I took my time. I opened the terminal, reviewed the logs, and slowly resolved the mismatch. It took 15 minutes. By the time I finished, 2 shipments had been delayed by a few minutes, and the warehouse team had called Donald to complain. It was a minor inconvenience, but it was the first time Donald had actually felt the heat of a system delay. He had been so used to a flawless green dashboard that he had forgotten what it felt like when the gears ground together. "Good job getting it back up, Brian," Donald said, wiping his brow. "Let us make sure we keep it green. I will do my best," I said. Meanwhile, I spent my evenings preparing my exit strategy. I contacted a legal counsel specializing in intellectual property rights. I showed him the contract I had signed 16 years ago when I joined the company, and I showed him the metadata for my custom monitoring scripts. "You wrote these scripts on your own computer, outside of office hours, and they are not part of your official job description?" the lawyer asked, reviewing the documents. "Yes," I replied. "I built them at home to make my own workload manageable. They were never formally commissioned by the company, and there is no clause in my contract assigning my personal creative work to them." The lawyer smiled. "Under the Copyright Act, Title 17 of the United States Code, you are the sole author and owner of this software. You have the exclusive right to distribute and license it. If you leave, they have no legal right to continue using your proprietary code without a written license agreement from you. That is what I thought, I said. I formally registered the scripts with the United States Copyright Office, securing my federal copyright protection. It was the ultimate safety measure. I was not going to damage their systems, nor was I going to delete their data. I was simply going to reclaim what was mine. On Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. It was an unrecognized number, but I answered it anyway. Brian Fletcher, I said. Brian, this is Julian Porter, Director of Operations at Apex Logistics. A steady, mature voice said on the other end. I hope I am not interrupting your work. No, Julian. What can I do for you? I asked. Apex Logistics was one of our most important clients, and I had worked closely with Julian to resolve several critical logistics bottlenecks over the years. I will get straight to the point, Brian, Julian said. We have been monitoring the performance of our distribution networks, and we know that whenever there is an issue on your side, you are the only one who actually resolves it. The other managers just send us presentations and status updates. We are building our own internal logistics platform, and we want you to run it. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the noisy operations floor. Run it? Yes, Julian said. We need a senior director of operations. You will have full authority over the system design, a dedicated team, and a starting salary of $160,000, along with full benefits and stock options. We want someone who understands how to build stability, not just talk about it. $160,000. That was nearly double what I was currently making after 16 years of service. It was a figure that reflected actual value, not a corporate alignment chart. That is a very serious offer, Julian, I said. We are a serious company, Brian, he replied. We know what you are worth, even if your current employer does not. I will email you the official contract. Take a day to look it over, but we would love to have you on board as soon as possible. We ended the call, and a few minutes later the contract arrived in my inbox. I read through it carefully. The terms were clean, professional, and respectful of my expertise. There were no hidden catches, no empty promises of future adjustments. It was a simple transaction. They needed my knowledge, and they were willing to pay for it. I looked at the contract for a long moment, then looked at the green dashboard on my monitor. The choice was no longer a decision. It was just a formality. I signed the contract electronically and sent it back. The next morning, I drafted my resignation letter. It was brief, polite, and gave exactly 2 weeks of notice. I sent it to Donald Finch and Brenda Vance at exactly 9 o'clock. My exit was set. Donald Finch walked over to my desk 10 minutes after I sent the email. He did not look panicked. He looked slightly inconvenienced. Brian, I saw your resignation letter. Are you sure about this? You have been here a long time. Yes, Donald, I said, looking up from my monitor. It is time for me to move on. Well, we are sorry to see you go, he said, though his voice lacked any real warmth. Where are you heading? I am going to work with a logistics firm, I replied, keeping the details vague. I see. Well, we will need to organize a smooth transition. I suppose Owen can handle the day-to-day operations once you are gone. You have trained him well, right? Owen knows how to read the dashboards and follow the documented workflows, I said, choosing my words carefully. Excellent, Donald said, nodding. We will get HR to schedule your exit interview. We appreciate your 16 years here, Brian. He walked away, already looking at his phone, likely thinking about how to frame my departure to senior leadership as a planned transition. To him, I was just a component in a machine that could be swapped out for a younger, cheaper model. The exit interview with Brenda Vance was a masterclass in corporate formality. She asked standard questions from a template, checked boxes on her screen, and thanked me for my contributions. We will ensure everything is transitioned cleanly. Brian, she said with her practiced smile, we wish you the best in your future endeavors. Thank you, Brenda, I said. Once the interview was complete, I returned to my desk and drafted an official notification. I addressed it to the company's general counsel, with copies to Brenda Vance and Donald Finch. In the letter, I formally declared that the custom middleware integration scripts, utility modules, and database synchronization tools currently running on the primary operations servers were my proprietary software, registered with the United States Copyright Office. I explained that I had developed these tools outside of my employment duties, using my personal resources, and had merely allowed the company to use them on a temporary basis, I wrote. Upon the termination of my employment on the 29th of October, I hereby revoke all permissions and licenses for the company to utilize, modify, or distribute my copyrighted software. Any continued use of these scripts after my departure will constitute willful copyright infringement under Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106. I sent the email and went back to organizing my personal files. The response from the legal department was swift. 3 hours later, I saw Donald Finch walking quickly toward my desk, followed by a senior vice president. Donald's face was no longer calm. It was pale. "Brian, what is this email from the legal department?" Donald asked, his voice hushed but urgent. "They are telling us we have to disable the database replication monitoring scripts." "That is correct, Donald," I said. "Those scripts are my personal intellectual property. I am revoking the license to use them. But we need those scripts to run the daily batch," Donald protested. "Then you will need to purchase a commercial license from me. Or build your own replacement," I replied calmly. "Otherwise, using them violates federal copyright law. Under Title 17 United States Code, Section 504, the statutory damages for willful infringement can reach up to $150,000 per violation. The General Counsel understands this, which is why they ordered the removal." Donald looked at the vice president, who looked back at him with cold frustration. "Is there no way we can keep them running while we transition?" the vice president asked. "No," I said. "My ownership is registered, and the license expires at 5 o'clock on my final day." The vice president turned to Donald. "Finch, get the engineering team to remove the scripts. We cannot risk a federal copyright lawsuit. We will use the standard systems." "But the standard systems are slow," Donald whispered. "Then make them fast," the vice president snapped, walking away. Donald turned back to me, his jaw clenched. "You really planned this out, did you not?" "I simply protected my assets, Donald," I said. "Just like you protect the company's budget." For the remaining week of my notice, I did exactly what was required. I documented the standard operations workflows. I showed Owen Gallagher how to run the manual database queries. I did not sabotage anything. I did not hide any official processes. I simply watched as the engineering team, under Donald's frantic direction, deleted my custom middleware scripts from the servers. Owen seemed confident. "Do not worry, Donald," I heard him say in the hallway. "We have the standard manuals. The dashboards still look fine. We can handle this." On my final Friday, I packed my few personal belongings into a cardboard box. I shut down my monitors one last time. There was no farewell party, no cake, and no speech. Donald Finch stayed in his office, and Owen was busy preparing his Monday presentation deck. I walked out of the building at 4:30 in the afternoon. The lobby was quiet, the glass doors sliding shut behind me. As I walked to my car, I felt the cool autumn air on my face. For the first time in 16 years, my phone was silent. I was no longer responsible for their stability. I was finally free. My first week at Apex Logistics was a refreshing change of pace. The operations floor was modern, the team was highly technical, and Julian Porter welcomed me with genuine respect. There were no empty slogans or hidden agendas. We spent the first few days analyzing the new system architecture and identifying areas for improvement. I was paid a fair wage, my authority was recognized, and my expertise was valued. Meanwhile, back at my old company, the departure of my proprietary scripts began to show its effects. Without my custom middleware to automatically catch and reconcile the timing offsets between the legacy database and the integration portal, the standard systems had to rely on manual syncs. On Monday morning, the transaction queue began to back up. Owen Gallagher, eager to prove himself, tried to manage the situation by scheduling emergency meetings and assigning tasks to the junior engineers. But the junior engineers only knew how to run the basic queries. They did not understand the underlying database latencies. By Wednesday of the first week, the queue delay had reached 20 minutes. The official dashboards, which had been green for years, turned yellow, then a deep, solid red. Julian Porter at Apex Logistics was the first to notice. His logistics team reported that their shipment notifications were delayed, causing trucks to sit idle at the distribution centers. We are seeing a massive increase in transaction errors from your end. Julian had called Donald Finch to complain. Donald had assured him that the team was working on a resolution and that it was just a temporary alignment issue, but it was not. Without my scripts to automatically correct the mismatches, the errors stacked up. By the end of the week, Apex Logistics quietly diverted 15% of their shipping volume to a competitor. It was a warning shot, but Donald did not know how to fix the bullet hole. By the second week, the situation turned critical. The database locked up completely at 3:15 in the morning on Tuesday, halting all transaction processing for 4 hours. When the morning shift arrived, the warehouse was in chaos. Shipments were delayed across the country. Clients were furious. The cumulative effect of the delays, the errors, and the lost trust was devastating. Key accounts began to pull back their volumes. By Friday morning, the finance department completed their weekly review. The numbers were shocking. The revenue generated by the operations department had dropped by 40% in a single week. It was the largest single-week revenue decline in the company's history. I was sitting in my living room on Friday evening, enjoying a quiet dinner, when my personal phone began to ring. I looked at the screen. It was the senior vice president who had accompanied Donald to my desk on my final week. I let it ring 3 times, then answered. "Brian Fletcher." "Brian, thank goodness you picked up," the vice president said, his voice stripped of all corporate polish. He sounded exhausted and desperate. "We have a critical situation here. The systems are experiencing massive latencies, and we have lost 40% of our weekly revenue. We need you to come back." "I am no longer an employee, and I am currently committed to my new role," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We do not need you full-time," he pleaded. "We can bring you in as an independent consultant. Just advisory, remote, 10 hours a week. We will pay you $300 an hour. We just need you to look at the database replication and tell us how to stabilize it." "Name your terms, Brian. We can make this work." $300 an hour. It was a massive number. Far more than they would have paid if they had simply given me the standard market raise I had asked for over the last 4 years. "I appreciate the offer," I said, looking out the window at the quiet street. "But I must decline." "Brian, please," the vice president said, his voice cracking slightly. "We are losing major clients. Apex Logistics has threatened to cancel their contract entirely. Surely we can reach an agreement. You had 4 years to adjust my compensation when I was preventing these problems," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You sat in that glass room and told me that my position was stable, and that the market did not support a raise. You chose to treat my silent maintenance as if it had no value. But stability is not free, and it is not default. It was held together by my scripts and my time. Now the system is simply operating at the level you chose to pay to maintain." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. The vice president had no response. He knew, as well as I did, that there was no argument left to make. They had made a financial calculation, and they had calculated wrong. "I wish you the best, but I am not available," I said, and gently ended the call. I put my phone down on the table. The room was quiet. I felt no triumph, no anger, and no spite. It was simply the logical conclusion of a system left to run on its own terms. Corporate leaders often believe that systems run on processes and dashboards, and that the people who build them are merely interchangeable parts. They ignore the silent dedication, the unwritten expertise, and the personal ownership that keeps their enterprises alive. But eventually, reality arrives. And when it does not present a slide deck. It presents a bill. I turned off the light and went to bed. For the first time in 16 years, my phone was silent. I was no longer responsible for their stability. I was finally free.